There is, I got an email actually this morning. I'd planned to talk to David Katz about this in detail. And you know, I've touched on this before, the fact that I think while we're focusing on who's president, increasingly in America, control of government is taken by the courts. And the best example of that, I'd say, is some of the SCOTUS cases that we've seen them preside over and also continue to preside over. The Roe case, high profile. But when it comes to regulatory agencies, agencies that are charged with protecting consumers, charged with protecting the environment, charged with protecting the quality of food, like the USDA, these are agencies that have power that is going to be undermined by this Supreme Court. I say is going to be because this court is so incredibly corporate friendly. It's so incredibly corporate polluter friendly. I see it as almost impossible to turn back that agenda. So you can look at what you might see as a Christian theological agenda that's associated with Roe, let's say. I mean, that has been going on for decades, trying to slowly erode Roe and women's reproductive rights. And then they finally got there, right, at the Supreme Court. But the other thing that's going on is an insanely business and corporate-friendly court that is ruling for business, for corporate polluters, and against regulatory agencies that are there to oversee them. And if you don't think it can happen, there's a case right now, and I'll tell you about it in a second. But if you don't think it can happen, here is what has already happened at the Supreme Court level.
The Supreme Court ruled to restrict the Environmental Protection Agency in setting emission standards for greenhouse gases. In a 6-3 decision, the court sided with the coal industry and 17 states that brought a lawsuit challenging rules put in place by the Obama administration and continued by the Trump administration that limited carbon emissions in each state. The regulations encourage states to meet those limits by using less coal and more alternative energy sources like wind and solar. It was successful in that reduction targets were met 11 years ahead of schedule. But the court said the EPA overstepped its authority. It said the EPA only has the authority to set limits for coal-fired plants, and that the agency would need authorization from Congress to implement such transformational rules. The justices were split along conservative and liberal lines, with Chief Justice John Roberts writing the majority opinion. Justice Elena Kagan wrote the dissenting opinion, stating the court has stripped the EPA of the power to respond to the most pressing environmental challenge of our time. For Inside Edition Digital, I'm Mara Montalbano.
There you go. Thank you, Inside Edition. I feel as though, and I've been saying this ever since the court started tilting conservative with the aggressive conservative justices being put in place, I've been saying this is the real agenda. I know Roe was a big deal and insanely important. But what this Supreme Court agenda looks like beyond Roe is all this. Essentially, dismantling government's ability to regulate water, air, soil, food, consumer protections. There are, I think, many examples of it all going away. So the minute you say that the EPA doesn't have the power to regulate toxins in the air, you end up in a place where, well, then what regulates the toxins in the air? And they say, well, Congress does. So you're going to take an agency filled with scientists and experts who are charged with evaluating these toxins, and you're going to rule that they have no power, and you're going to turn over the question of toxicity in the environment, in air, water, soil, to a bunch of people who don't know anything about chemistry, don't know anything about science, many of them. They are in no position to even evaluate these toxins It's utterly absurd. And this is happening now. I'm going to talk to David Katz tomorrow about it. If you're just joining us, he's the former federal prosecutor, brilliant legal mind. And he'll decode some of this for us. But this conservative majority seems inclined to overturn or limit the executive agencies and these regulatory agencies charged with environmental protection, healthcare protection, consumer safety, nuclear energy, government benefit programs. They may all go away at the federal level. It seems inconceivable, I know, but didn't the overturn of Roe seem inconceivable? We are rapidly, in my judgment, turning over control of this country and essentially handing the courts control of this country in ways that are horribly scary. Even justices, even those well-educated justices, they're not in a position to evaluate toxins in the environment, consumer safety, corporate business regulations. They're not in any position to do that. I mean, we have these government agencies for a reason. They're populated with people with real expertise. Instead, you're going to rip that power from them and hand it over to Congress. You've seen what Congress is. They can't find their butt with both hands. And they can't get anything done anyway. So it'll just founder there. Nothing will happen. Meantime, your kids are going to be taking in more toxins. And all of the threats to the environment, to the consumer, they continue and they'll grow.
Well, does that mean if the EPA doesn't have a jurisdiction to regulate our environment, then you could say, well, then, okay, then the FDA can't regulate our food. And the health department or whatever, they have no jurisdiction either. They can't tell us that we need to get vaccinated, or they can't. So then no one can do anything. And then
that's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. You summarized it perfectly. I mean, it seems weird when you say
government. What's the point of we're thrown into anarchy and everything's acceptable then?
Well, I mean, there's still people in charge. I mean, it's not anarchy, but
in
those
charge of what?
I mean, it's not as though
anything. They can't make my life better. They can't do anything for me.
No, they can't make your life better. You're right about that. But it's not as though all of society is going to melt down. Those regulatory bodies that now are involved with consumer protections, which, by the way, can be tepid anyway. Already, you're not getting, in my view, the stout consumer protections you should have.
Yeah.
I think we look the other way on the tonnage of toxins that are being dumped in the oceans, spewed out in the air and into the soil. We already look the other way on that. So the existing regulations are tepid. They're not really strong already. But yes, those would all go away, or those would then be put into the courts. Maybe some would survive, maybe some would be watered down. The idea is that these agencies can still exist. All right, the Supreme Court isn't saying they can't exist. They're saying they can be one more opinion about how clean the water should be. And that opinion is then ranked alongside the other opinion from the corporate experts who bring in, and now you're in litigation and you're essentially adjudicating in a court how clean the water should be. This to me is absurd.
Let's dump it into the hands of the non-science believing yahoos. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense, but it is going to happen. And what's happening now is based on, and I'll move on from this, and I'll talk, as I say, with David Katz more about this, but it's based on a case right now before the Supreme Court involving fishermen. I'll just leave it at that. But we'll get into that in a bigger way tomorrow. But I just gave you, and I told you this years ago, as they began to replace these members of the Supreme Court, I said, this is a corporate-friendly court. It's not about cultural issues only. It's about corporate business and representing corporations and business in ways that essentially overturn consumer rights and environmental protections. So That's what's happening there. We'll watch it, as I say. We'll talk to Katz about it tomorrow. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.